morning, everybody. Welcome to today's seminars. The speaker of the seminars will be Architect Ahila Ganesan. But first and foremost, I'd like to invite Chairman to give a welcoming speech first.
Okay, Dato. Good morning, Dato.
Morning.
A very good morning to everybody. Hope everybody is safe and well, as usual. On behalf of PAM and Northern Chapter, first of all, I'd like to thank you for attending, and I'd like to thank Garis PXL for hosting the event, and our PAM Secretariat, Pat, ever efficient secretary, organizing the webinar. Thank you, Dato Lo, for moderating and guiding us through the event. Thank you, Architect Casey Chong, our CBD chairman for PAM Northern Chapter, for organizing this. And last but not least, thank you, Architect Ahila, for taking your time to share with us your knowledge on the topic of SDG, which I think is very important. I just want to say a few words of something about SDG and my own personal understanding, or lack of understanding rather, of it. I think until a few years ago, I perhaps, like a lot of architects, think SDG is about greening the development and building. But I think it's much more than that, which I think Architect Ahila will actually explain later on. I don't want to kind of go into that too much. Yeah. But as architects, I think we have a very important role to play in the SDG process in creating healthy and community and healthy people. So it's something that perhaps we as architects should be adopting in our everyday policy in our office. As a matter of course, you don't have to kind of like almost do it, forced to do it, but become natural course of designing any buildings or places. I think that would be a very good approach for architects. So I don't want to go too much into the details because I think that will all open up when Architect Ahila explain and do the presentation. It's all in there actually. I hope, like me, most of you who are not sure about what SDG represent and what we can do will go away from this seminar much more informed. And I look forward to the presentation. Thank you very much. Back to you, Dato.
Thank you, Chairman. Before we start the seminar, let me introduce our speaker, Architect Ahila Ganesan. She has over 20 years of experience as a consultant architect and a leader in property developments for award-winning Malaysian and international projects. A professional architect by training, her career saw her helming the northern region for some of the most prominent property developers in Malaysia, such as Sunway Property and Masing Property. Her vast expertise includes strategic planning, business development, project management, marketing strategy, and business strategy for multi-billion dollars projects. Now, her current role as a director of strategy and development leverages on the close network built over the years to head the business strategy, international expansion, and development for Think City. Now, Think City actually is established by Khazanah. I think in 2009, right? I think we talk about Think City in some other seminars maybe. Now she's involved in various facets of the nation building in the context of sustainable urbanism that require bringing together a wide spectrum of global and local stakeholders, including the United Nations Development Program, United Nations Habitat, World Bank, etc. Architect Ahila is an environmental, social, and governance recognized ESG advocate and certified sustainability professional. She served as a special advisor to the ESG Foundation, a global entity located in London, focusing on ESG awareness, thought leadership, and the importance of ESG in organizations for the well-being of the stakeholder they serve. Now, today, the synopsis of the talk, mainly on architecture and the sustainable goals, development goals in the race to 2030. Just go through briefly. In 2015, United Nations General Assembly designed a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all by the year 2030. The collection of 17 interlinked global goals, which is known as SDGs 17, is referred to as the Sustainable Development Goals or Global Goals. Fast forward to 2021, we are now closer to achieving the SDGs, and the climate clock continue to count down to zero, at which time our carbon budget will be depleted and the likelihood of devastating global climate impact is a certainty. Now, this month, the G20 leaders committed to the key goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius in conjunction with the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, also known as COP26 at Glasgow. Now, the world is at the tipping point, but how does this translate into the built environment, the language of architecture, and the role of architects play? Now, the webinar attempts to shed lights into the challenges faced as well as possible areas of intervention by the built environment. Now, architects have a crucial role to play as timing is running out in the race to 2030. Now, today, mainly, Architect Ahila will be covering the what is sustainability and the sustainable developments, two SDGs, architecture and the built environment, and then SDG and Penang 2030, and of course, Penang Bay as a new economic zone and SDGs cities. Okay, I think without wasting much time, I'd like to invite Architect Ahila to start the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato. Thank you, Casey, Architect Casey Liao. I'm happy to be here. I'm stoked that we have quite a few participants. I'm assuming they are of various ages at this point, ranging from very young to perhaps a bit more senior. I'm going to share my screen and take you through the agenda for the day. Give me a second. Can I assume that everybody can see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So just to take you through this, today, sustainable development goals it's a very big topic, right? It's a very big topic. So one of the discussions that I had with the PAM committee is, at what level, at what stage do our architects know about sustainable development goals? And through my discussion, it was discovered that perhaps some know more, some do not know much at all. So what we would likely have to do is start building a foundation, especially in the PAM Northern chapter, because this topic is very important and it's also aligned with the state strategic plans and visions for 2030. So with that, this is what we're going to cover. We're going to cover what is sustainability and what is sustainable development. We're going to look at what is SDGs, architecture, and the built environment. SDGs and Penang 2030. Penang 2030 is the document which is the strategic master plan roadmap for the state of Penang until 2030. Then we'll look at Penang Bay as a new economic zone, which is a project that I'm personally helming, and also SDG cities. Then I'd like to share some relevant resources with you all, and then we'll go into the Q&A session. With that, I would like to ask all of y'all here, I think by now, everybody through the pandemic know how to use the QR codes, how to access through your phone. If you could just click on this, there are two options, using the QR code or perhaps to log into this and key in this code and answer a couple of very simple questions. Actually, it's just one question at this moment in time. And I will display the results in a few minutes. Is it possible for you to just give a shout out, turn on your mic and give a shout out if you can't do it, but I would assume that by now you know how to use a QR code. If anybody can't access it, do let me know. I've got about 5 responses so far. 6, 7, got about 10 responses so far. I think we've got about 30 participants. But don't worry, we'll get better at this if you haven't used menti.com before. Sure, I'll share the link. Give me a second, yeah? I'll copy and paste this link into the chat box.
I think for those who has iPhone, you can just turn on your scanner and then scan the QR code.
Okay, I've got about 9 responses only so far, which is, I think, anybody having problems? Just put it in the chat box. What I'll do is I'll share my screen right now. So 13 have responded. This is live, if you can see my screen. So it'll kind of show you where people are at. Mostly people are somewhat familiar. There are a few who have never heard of it. And so far, nobody who is very familiar. So that kind of gives me a gauge of where people are at. You kind of know what it is. Perhaps like architect Casey Liao, you thought it was mostly about climate. Yes, it's a very big part of it, but there's actually other parts, facets to it. So what I'll do is please continue to vote and I will share it later, but I'll continue with my talk first. Okay, so now that I've got a rough guide of where everybody is, I can sort of tailor the presentation accordingly. With that, let me start. Okay, what is sustainability, right? And sustainable development. I'm going to take you back in history. We're going to go back to 1987. So what happened in 1987 is a Brundtland Commission was created by the United Nations as a response to a global outcry. People were not happy with the way things were going when it came to environmental issues, economic issues, and social issues. And out of that Brundtland Commission, what came out was a report called Our Common Future. And that's where you first heard of the word sustainable development. Subsequently, in 1992, UN then came up with the Sustainable Development Agenda 21. This is a non-binding agreement, and it was then, it didn't do very well because it's non-binding. So, and organizations in 1992 were not exactly ready yet to address these issues when it came to sustainability. They wanted to do things business as usual. They were not really looking at the trends that were happening. They were aware of it, but they were not keen to participate. Subsequently, about another almost a decade later, what happened was they developed the Millennium Development Goals, again under United Nations. And with this, they brought in 191 member countries to pledge that they'll achieve the Millennium Development Goals by 2015. This was in response to a lot of things that happened, inclusive of Some of y'all might be very young, you might not remember, but there were a lot of natural disasters that happened. There were also a lot of man-made disasters that happened. Oil spills like Exxon Valdez that happened, which was also an outcry where there was no proper governance, there was no proper recourse for people in order to hold organizations accountable for the kind of devastation they were bringing forth. So with the Millennium Goals, development goals, what happened was they said, okay, let's look at this carefully. Let's get people together. Let's get the countries to commit to achieving this. The problem with this was it was quite a failure because it was looked at as a very top-down agenda. You had all these, countries, people who are at the top, public policy makers that come on board and say, you need to do this, you need to do that. And it was predominantly a North versus South. So a Northern agenda, meaning the rich countries or the developed countries, were they pushing their agenda to try to make the developing countries become compliant. And this didn't sit very well with people in general because they did not engage with NGOs. They did not engage with the community. It was a very top-down measure. And with that failure, then there was a rethinking. What do you then do? Because there was a lot of issues that are not covered here. You see, there were only 8 goals here. There was no goals, and most of these goals were addressed towards developing nations. And the modus operandi, if you will, for this was basically the rich countries were investing in poorer countries, and they considered that as their what they were supposed to do, and that's it. But in their own countries, it was business as usual. In their own countries, it was still human rights abusers, but they were going out there and telling other countries, you can't do this, you can't do that. So it did not sit very well. It was a big failure. In response to that, they introduced in 2015 the Sustainable Development Goals. They had a key people coming together, and at this point, they were a bit more savvy. They took on board the comments that were given with the failure of the Millennium Development Goals. They got people to come on board to talk about their perspectives. So you had the NGOs, you had global public engagements, you had member nations, civil society, everybody coming together. And you had 193 countries, as opposed to 191, signing on to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. There are 169 targets. It's a lot of targets. So you have goals and then you have targets to it. And essentially, this was a response to to the Millennium Development Goals. As to is it successful? At this moment in time, there is a very big effort to push it through. I understand that architects are not familiar with it. I was actually very lucky because Sunway is I was in Sunway Property, and during my time, it was during when the Sustainable Development Goals were introduced, and Sunway Property or Sunway Group actually took the initiative to set up a sustainable division in terms of Sustainable Development Goals in Sunway University as the Jeffrey Sachs Center. And Jeffrey Sachs was the brainchild of the Sustainable Development Goals. He's a professor from Columbia University. So we were a bit lucky because we have been practicing this for some time, and perhaps that's where the interest of all of this came for me personally. So let's kind of compare the two, right? Sustainable Development Goals and the Millennium Development Goals. What you have in the core, if you can see my mouse, this is the Millennium Development Goals. It did not address everything. There were some areas that were addressed. Like for one, yes, you had no poverty, zero hunger. It was addressed by the goal number 1 in MDGs, but SDGs split them up. And similarly, there was a lot more areas where it was split up. And then if you look at this, there are some completely new goals when it comes to sustainable development, and they address cities, like in number 11, the essentially sustainable development when it comes to cities. And as you know, cities contribute to most of the carbon footprint in the world, because people are moving more and more to the cities. There's an expectation that most of the world's population will be living in the cities by 2050. With that, there is a huge push to start making cities more sustainable, which is in the sphere that I'm working in with Think City right now. Now, in all of these goals, you might think as an architect, how do I work towards no poverty? How do I work towards zero hunger? And the thing is, there is actually areas where architects are important in these interventions, in every one of these goals. It might not look very obvious, but I will run through them in the next section. Going back to the Brundtland report, this is where they define sustainable development, and this is what it means. It's basically humanity has the ability to make development sustainable to ensure that it meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. If you listen to people like Greta Thunberg, the reason that she is very angry with people in power is because the way things are being done right now is not going to help her generation, the younger generation, and my kids' generation meet their own needs, because we are consuming so much, more than what the planet can offer. So let's explain this in a nutshell. What is it? As what architect Casey Liao said, it is not only about the environment, which falls under the planet aspect of it, right? On the bottom left. It is about people. It is also about profit. It is about bringing these three spheres together and seeing where it is sustainable. Now, if you concentrate on people and planet, yes, it's bearable, right? It's bearable. It's not an issue. Planet and profit, that's viable. People and profit, that's equitable. But what is truly sustainable is trying to find that place, that point where the convergence point, where all of these three areas come together, and that is where you can be truly sustainable, right? And all of these goals that I have right here, I've mapped it against each one of these circles. As you can see, you need to address the entire spectrum in order to get it to be really sustainable. With that, again, to menti.com, I was wondering if you would perhaps be a bit more savvy with this right now. I'm going to again copy and paste this into the chat box. And if you can see this QR code, I am now going to exit the screen, stop sharing this, and we are going to go into the Mentimeter. I see that there's a hand raised by architect YC Lee. Do you have a question?
Sorry, just accidentally pressed.
Oh, right. Okay, no worries.
Apologize. Sorry so much.
No problem. I have got 3 responses so far. I'm very interested to know your response to this. How do you rank the principle of sustainability in accordance to importance to you? There's no right or wrong answer, yeah? It is what is important to you, right? As an individual. If anybody has issues, please let me know.
Can you go back to the QR code?
Absolutely. Give me a second, yeah? 9 responses so far.
Fellow members, I think be more try to participate in the survey.
Look, there's no right or wrong, yeah? It is just to gauge what you think is important. I'm going to start sharing that screen now. I've got 12 respondents so far. I think you can see my screen. As you can see, environment comes out on top and economic comes out at the bottom. Now, this may be a reality to you as an individual. However, I wonder if I had another question, rank the principles of sustainability in accordance to the importance for your client, I wonder whether it would be different, right? Because my guess would be that perhaps they would think that the economic part of it is probably the most important to them. Again, I could be wrong. You know your clients better, but I think that that's my take on it. And perhaps we can have a bit of a discussion about that in the Q&A session later. I would also like to share with you what was in the earlier part of it. As you can see, I'm so glad to see there are some people who are very familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. That is very encouraging. I'm happy about that. Can you guys see the screen? The screen about the previous survey? Yes. Okay, so there were 18 respondents. As you can see, people are mostly familiar with it, so that's good. So we can still build on this foundation. Right. Please continue to vote. I'll stop sharing and go to the next session. So just to recap here, right? The levers of sustainability requires all three. It requires the economics of it, it requires the social of it, and it definitely requires the environment of it. So Sustainable Development Goals is not about only climate. While the focus is at this moment in time very much focused on climate, I'd like to urge you all to look at it from the perspective of everything else in totality, not just about climate, right? That's only one part, one spoke of the wheel, a very important spoke, but it is not the only one. And this is very important for you as an architect, because at the end of the day, as we go through today, you need to understand what is important to your client. Now, let's be realistic here. If you have a client that wants to look at Sustainable Development Goals, you're lucky enough to have a client who's interested in that, you will need to also look at it from the perspective of what are their priorities. Their priorities might not be the environment. Their priorities might be more towards people-centric, right? So then how do you tailor your services as an architect to tie in with their priorities and their strategies? Now, this is where you will have to work closely with your client, especially if you have a public listed client. So I will take you through that in the presentation. Now let's look at it. What is Sustainable Development Goals in relation to architecture and the built environment, right? I am going to take you from a macro to a micro perspective. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Sustainable Development Goals is very vast. So if you look at it in the global setting, it is about the Sustainable Development Goals already, UN Habitat, the kind of agendas they are pushing in. Every department or every unit in UN, United Nations, it could be UNEP, UNDP, UNH, all of them have got specific areas that they focus on when it comes to the global priorities that are SDGs. Then you distill it down to a country. They have your country-specific priorities. And country-specific priorities will be based on your yearly budget. If any of y'all watched what was in the budget, there was a lot of focus on what is called ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, which is targeted specifically to listed companies and companies in general for them to start adopting sustainable practices within the way they operate, right? And then there's the 12th Malaysia Plan, also released recently. Now, I'm assuming that most of y'all have not looked at it, but I do urge you, get the document, have a look at it, and perhaps look at what are the areas that are related to you. Then you distill it down further to a region-specific priority, okay? And since this is the PAM Northern chapter, I'm sure we have participants from other areas, but I will talk about Penang specifically here. And they will have their state structure plan, state visioning document, which is your Penang 2030. Then you distill it even further, right? Because regions have cities, right? You've got mainland, you've got island, etc. And with that, with mainland and island, with the division, you're going to have local plan for mainland, local plan for the island, right? And then within specific city, like the project that I'm involved in, we are looking at SDG cities, a compliant Penang Bay as a SDG cities compliant zone. Then you distill it even further. Sustainability is distilled even further to a micro level when it comes to building specifically. Now, this is where predominantly I would assume that most architects are familiar. You're looking at Green Building Index, you're looking at Green RE, LEED, etc. But that is only a microcosm of the entire spectrum, right? You will only affect in certain aspects. It is a very important spoke of the wheel, yes, but there are other areas that you need to know. And when you come to the services that you provide as an architect, again, go back to what your state requires, what your city requires when it comes to their development blueprint. And when you have a client who's doing projects in that area, as an architect, your role is to see where those areas meet for the guidelines and for the vision of the state, as well as the priorities of the client. So you have to take these two levers and you kind of need to balance it. It's a balancing act, but there are areas that you can interface. So today, I can't cover all of it. I've just covered the global priorities, which is the SDGs, which is sort of like a history of it. And what are the 17 goals? They range from no poverty to looking at climate change, to looking at cities, right? There's 17 goals. Then what I will take you through is the region part of it and the city part of it, which is very specific, right? I will not take you through the building because you know about this already. And most of us are already practicing in this sphere at this moment in time. So let's go through the goals one by one in detail. And when I say in detail, what do I mean? Because, you know, when you look at this, something like no poverty, you're going to think, what can an architect possibly do to affect this, right? What can they do? And here's the thing, if you really distill it down to the targets within that goal, there are areas an architect can intervene. So the built environment, you can impact people through the access of housing and institutions that are affordable, right? And how do you do that? You shape the policy if you can, right? So you have housing policy. And housing policy, I think in Penang, you've got your speed meetings. That's where architects sit. They try to influence that. You've got developers trying to influence that through REDA. So you have all these professionals trying to influence the policy part of it. And this is where an architect also has a very important role to play, the policy aspect of it, right? Then you have social housing, co-ops, and urban improvement. All of this, it would be very good if you could make it part and parcel of the services that you deliver when you're doing a project for your client. Then we look at affordable housing technology and supply system, right? Do you want to have some technology that is put in that is going to make it a bit more sustainable? Would you like to source your materials for this particular development that is sustainable? Now, the job here for an architect is not an easy one, because your client is going to tell you, I got no money. Okay, I was a developer before, so I know exactly what they're going to say. They will say, I have no money. This is expensive. You want to source this alternative supply and it's expensive. So this is where you will need to be a bit smart about it, meaning that you can't make the entire supply chain sustainable. Start with little bits, right? Maybe only this particular material we do sustainable. Negotiate with your client, right? And this is where you need to build up the reputation of yourself as someone who pushes this agenda, as well as convince your client that this is the way to go. Another way to convince your client is looking at their own priorities as a client. What are their deliverables and their KPIs within their organization? And then try to dovetail those two areas. Now, I'm going to give you an example for each one of these goals. I have examples here. It is not exhaustive. I've got one example, right? I'm not saying that there are no examples in Malaysia. If there are any examples in Malaysia, I encourage you to put it in the chat box down below, and we can have a robust discussion about it later. So when we look at poverty in goal, no poverty in goal number 1, I've given you the areas of intervention an architect can have. And then let's look at an example. Again, architect, big, okay, big, everybody knows who he is. We also know that he does lots of huge projects. In fact, he was also involved in the South Island reclamations. And he's also involved in things like this, and not-for-profit affordable housing in Denmark, right? So there are levers in which an architect can do big projects. They can also do something where it is a bit more sustainable, where it helps in the social aspect of things to reduce poverty. And as you know, every one of us knows here that low-cost housing is something that is compulsory in the state. And as you all also know, your client is going to ask you, is there any way to avoid it, right? So I'm not saying don't do what you need to do as an architect for your client. Of course, you should, but you should also try to see if you can convince them that social housing is in their interest, right? At least in the terms of goodwill with the state, because this is a huge agenda of the state, as I'll show you later. Then we go to zero hunger. Again, this is an area where people might think, how can an architect possibly do that, right? But it does help in terms of securing your food supplies through planning, landscape design, complexes, looking at urban areas in terms of trying to grow food, etc. So let's look at some examples. Urban farming. This is again a very big thing. Cooperative production activities, regenerative landscape design. All of y'all are actually, most of y'all, I would say, are probably already involved in this, where you would try to see whether there is a place where you could do some sort of a plot, which is urban farming within the developments that you do, right? So that is a possibility. It could also dovetail with the requirements of your client. What are the other areas you can do that? You can design to cope with climate change, right? So make sure that whatever you do, the plants that you introduce, make sure that they are able to cope with climate change. Don't put a tree that does not thrive in a tropical setting in a development just because, you know, it looks better. I don't think that's the way you need to look at it anymore. And perhaps even if your client says, you know, I really want that, compromise. Say, yeah, okay, let me give you a small percentage of this, but let's try to do these other planting areas better, because they are more resilient towards climate change, right? And in the long run, your maintenance will be lower. So these are the ways where you can try to make sure that as an architect, you can try to look at these aspects. An example, impact farm in Radonia, Denmark, right? So this is an example of how architecture and the built environment is involved in this. Now, I'm very sure in Penang, with the big push towards urban farming, and if you look at digital, Penang Digital Library, there's also an urban farm there that the producers of the urban farm goes to feeding the B40 community, For those of you who do not know what a B40 community is, B40 is below 40. That means basically the people in the bottom tier of the population who make minimum wages. So the produce from there goes to feeding the B40 community. If you can encourage your clients to start looking at certain plots of land within their development where there's urban farming, which then is part of their CSR activities to sort of convince the state government as well to see how you can then help the B40 communities, that would be very helpful. If you're doing certain projects within, say, Balik Pulau area, and there is a push for urban farming in Balik Pulau area, then try to do that as well. Let's look at goal 3, good health and well-being. This is a bit easier, a bit more palatable for architects because you understand this. Indoor climate is an influential factor to health, even more so now with the pandemic, in a post-pandemic era where we realize that it can't be the same. I think our Newford standards that we used to use when we were in school, it probably has to be revamped in terms of distancing between people, in terms of the sizes of auditoriums and the capacity they can hold, right? And the seating and etc. That entire Newford booklet probably has to be revamped. So what are the possible solutions? Fundamental in design, healthy indoor environment. So that part of it, I think every architect is aware about it. Make sure that it is part and parcel of your design. And if you are a person who's part of the GBI group of thinkers, you're going to be doing this naturally anyway. Layout of districts and cities should reduce any risk of accidents. Again, work with your traffic consultant and try to make sure that the line of sight is there. Make sure that the traffic is dealt with so that we are minimizing traffic where we can outside of the peak hours. Avoid environmentally hazardous materials and substances. This again goes back to your GBI. Make sure you don't use asbestos. I don't think they produce them anyway anymore. And make sure you use low VOC paints, etc. So that's part and parcel of what an architect already does. Then design to promote citizens' activities, right? Within your development, make sure there's spaces for citizens to participate. Even more now, when you realize that the buildings that we have built over the course of the past 30 years have been little bird cages, essentially. And during the lockdown, all of us have felt it, have felt constrained, and we have wanted the release of public spaces. And while we were not allowed to go and enjoy the public spaces in, say, the parks, etc., if your development has got ample space for people to have exercise, to be able to do their daily walks, etc., it will be very helpful. So look at that. Look at the way you design your development to make sure there is spaces for you to have activities. Example of a fitness roof on top of a building in Denmark by Yaya Architects. Again, I'm giving you examples outside of this country. There are plenty of examples within the country, but I thought perhaps I'll give you some examples outside for you to see other ways that it can be done. So this is one way the rooftop of your building can be used for this. Of course, you're going to have your water tanks and etc., but there's always space on top of your roof of the building, which either A, you can use for solar power because you're going to put up your solar panels, or perhaps you can use it in this way. So again, it goes back to the way, the priorities that your client has, right? If they say, hey, I can't afford to put solar panels at the top of the building, perhaps this is another way to do it, right? Where it still deals with the sustainable development goals, right? It is still part of sustainability, but it is not going to cost as much. Let's look at quality education, right? Schools and educational places are crucial. I think we all agree about that. And it is an investment for our future. What are the areas architects can intervene? Affordable and productive learning environment. I'm going to give you a very interesting example later. And independent energy supply system and flexible classroom systems, okay? Again, coming back to the pandemic, what we realize is you need to have flexible classrooms, something that can, those of you who went to Sekolah Kebangsaan like I did, you always saw certain classes had got the dividing area between your classes so you could combine classes when needed. Over the course of the years, I'm not sure if that's still in practice, but perhaps we need to go back to that, because then it allows you to expand your classrooms and use it for different requirements, right? Collaboration with community during design and usage stages to promote sustainable local culture. So that is always part of what you need to do. You need to communicate with the community in that area. And even when if you are part of, if you're looking at designing a college, a school, etc., I'm sure that your client has already done some sort of market research of seeing whether their school will be viable, and also gotten the proper approvals from the Ministry of Education. But you still need to collaborate with the surrounding communities to kind of promote the way things are done, to promote the sustainability aspect of it. Give you an example, the community dome in a village in Jordan, right? This is an educational facility for refugee children from Syria, right? So this is one of the things that they have done. And as you can see, look at it, it's a very simple building. It's essentially a mud building, and it has got ventilation through pipes, but it's simple enough and it fits the purpose, right? So these are some of the areas that it can be done, even in a place where it's only for refugee children, it can be done, and it is being done by architects, right? So that's where it comes back to your role as an architect in this. Moving along, gender equality, design of buildings, settlements, urban areas must be inclusive to all citizens, regardless of gender. What do you do? Public spaces, facilities, services must be safe, right? So they must be safe. Make sure there's plenty of lighting. Make sure that, that the areas that you design, there are no blind spots, no areas that women or children will feel unsafe. Affordable and safe facilities with health and sanitary services and meeting places. Again, make sure there are areas that are ample for you to have gatherings where people can meet, and it's not just specific to one gender or another. Now, if you're designing in a country which has got different requirements because of religion, say in a very predominantly Muslim country in Middle East, if you're designing there, of course you have to design to their sensibilities, but the key here is not to forget the 50% of the population that might be there. So what are the spaces where the women can gather, right? Because they might still have to be separated from the men, but how do they still have that equitable access to public spaces? Designing of playgrounds, public parks, and sports facilities. So this is again supporting that. The built industry to encourage equality so that more women can join the industry. This goes back to something very fundamental. Hire women as well in your industry. If you have a predominantly male setting in your organization, make sure that you involve more women. If you have jobs that require people to go to site, don't assume that women are not able to do it. I was a resident architect for 3 years in my beginning of my career, and I'm very proud of that part of my career. And I think there are more than a few women who would be more than interested to participate in the building industry, even in areas where it's considered a men's only area. An example could be the maternity unit in Uganda, where they have designed something for post giving birth for women, right? So they come out of hospital, most of the time they are sent back home, but there's always a post care that might be needed, especially in African nations where the infant mortality and maternal mortalities are very high. So again, these are some of the areas. Again, one example, right? There are plenty of other examples. I'm just giving you one in the interest of time. Clean water and sanitation, which is goal number 6 in the SDGs. Take advantage of rainfall, where clean water is scarce in buildings, urban areas. So it might be designed for rainwater can be collected, purified, and used as drinking water. Again, this aligns very nicely with GBI as well. Let's look at what it is. This is a no-brainer. Keep your rainwater separated from your wastewater. I think all of us know this. Do not contaminate the groundwater during extraction, construction, or in use. So this is where you play a role. Make sure that the site that you manage is run sustainably. Make sure that the disposal of hazardous material is done in a proper manner that is aligned with sustainable development goals. Designed to withstand climate change. Again, climate change plays a role here. Make sure that you design to withstand it. Make sure you have your rainwater harvesting tank where you can. Make sure you have got, because as climate change happens, you also have flooding issues. So make sure you have your on-site detention in place. Make sure that you have your swales, right? Your natural swales that you need in order for it to absorb. Your landscape areas could be your on-site detention. How do you then make sure that something serves dual purposes? That is one way. Make sure your landscape areas can also be your on-site detention when there is heavy rainfall. Water resource conservation. This is the norm. Again, in architecture, you're probably going to have your dual flush systems. Try to have, I think PBA requires you to have that little circular thing in your faucets to make sure that water is aerated so that you're not wasting so much water. And Penang is known to be a place, the highest consumption of water in Malaysia. And that is something, even in households, yeah, I'm not talking about factories, right? Factories is a different matter. I'm talking about households. And that is something that we need to address very, very seriously. Especially when you have other states saying that, hey, you can't take water from us, etc. Okay, Waka water in Ethiopia, right? Architect Arturo Vittorio, right? This is a shortlisted project for Aga Khan Award for Architecture. And it is ingenious way where it collects droplets of water in this very humid environment. And it collects up to 100 liters of water daily. Again, this is not an engineering solution. Notice that it's being done by an architect. Yes, it is an engineering solution, but architects have a role to play, and this was done by an architect. So look at these options. Look at new technology. This is a pretty basic technology, right? Being done in Ethiopia. But there are so many new technologies out there that you can incorporate into your design, you can incorporate into your developments. Goal 7, affordable and clean energy. The built environment, major source of energy consumption. We know that. Potentially is also a crucial energy producer. Optimal building layout and energy consumption. We know this, very simple, passive way of doing it. Make sure you face north-south, not east-west, right? We know this. Of course, there are certain times when that can't happen because of the site, constraints of the site. So if you do have to face east-west, minimize exposure, etc. Daylighting and natural ventilation, heating, cooling of the building, going back to your passive part of it, right? And if you can install solar panels at the top of the building or the rooftop to offset your own consumption. Now that the subsidy, essentially what the government is subsidizing for electricity, and the announcement as of yesterday, I believe, where they said they might not be subsidizing anymore, TNB bills are going to be going up. Architects have a responsibility to advise the clients that it will be in their interest to invest something upfront in order for the long-term benefit, not just for the world, but for themselves as well. An example, powerhouse in Oslo. Energy load is reduced by effective use of well water, solar panels, and simple zoning, right? These are the areas we can intervene. Goal 8, the built environment interacts with decent work and economic growth on both a planning level and a building level. Again, safe public spaces and affordable transit routes, right? Yes, you have no control as an architect individually, but you do, the PAM does sit on a lot of committees. There are ways to influence it. You as an individual, while you're an architect, you also have a say in trying to push towards transit routes, right? Right now, we don't even have transit routes. We don't even have proper public transportation. So the affordable part, if you set it aside, what we need to do in Penang right now is to push for public transportation. Look at workplace design for healthy and productive space for employees. Again, going back to the pandemic, this has completely changed. Do not use Newford. You have to adapt. You have to look at what is the requirements right now as far as health significance goes. You need to start designing workplace. You need to also be on point with the trends that are happening, which is work from home, hybrid working, the gig economy. What are the areas where we are looking at in terms of trying to fuse the two, where people are saying, I don't need to work from the office anymore, I can work from anywhere. So what is that anywhere? It could be cafes. So then perhaps that is where you're going to see a big boom. Places which are public, places where people can interact with people who are not from their own office, right? Because they want to work from anywhere. You're also going to have spaces where people are looking for collaboration rather than you're sitting down in your own little cubicle and doing your work. So what are those collaboration spaces going to be looking like, right? It's going to be something where people can come together, where people can look at it and say, yes, we've made the most out of this meeting. I don't have to be here every day. I can still work from home and come to these spaces when I need to do collaboration. And that is the way it's going to move forward. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Anybody who expects that they can go back to work 100% will find that they're going to have a very difficult time finding talent. And people will not, especially when I look at people who are in the Gen Z, the 24-year-olds that are coming into the workforce right now, they are not going to come in. So if you want to retain talent, you got to go with the times, you got to see what works. And similarly, you need to advise your clients on what is the trends, right? They might know already, but we need to start looking at it. We need to start following what is happening in the architecture sphere when it comes to workplace design. Good working environments lead to higher productivity and fewer sick days. I think this is a no-brainer. I don't have to go into it in detail. Building industry focus is needed on decent working conditions and safety for workers. Again, this is part and parcel of what you do as an architect. Make sure your site is safe. Make sure all your health and safety inspector is on site, especially if your project is big enough to warrant one who is full-time. Your client is going to try to save money and say, no, you don't need one who is full-time. You know the regulations, push for it, stand your ground. If it is required, it is required. Atelier Gondo in Burkina Faso, right? So also a center for sustainable building technology aiming to exchange between local craftsmen, architects, students, visitors to study and innovate building methods. So what they did was they started involving the surrounding community into what they're doing, right? So they started engaging with them. And with that, you have a spurt of innovation, a spurt of job opportunities, and you will have economic growth, right? Not just for the surrounding areas, but when you have an innovation that works, you can then market it outside and the money flows back into this area and the people who live in this area. So again, architects have a very important role to play when it comes to the community aspect of it, the people aspect of it, because jobs are part and parcel of it. 9, industry innovation infrastructure. Building industry is producing massive amounts of waste and consuming large amounts of natural resources and energy. Again, we know this is not new. What are the areas? Innovative processes of production and assembly. This is perhaps BIM. It's perhaps looking at the way you do your form work, using system form work. It could be something like that. Reduce transportation services by using local industries. Source your material locally if you can. Try to reduce your footprint by making sure perhaps if you can get tiling from somebody who's producing it in Kedah as opposed to somebody who's producing it in Johor Bahru, right? If that is possible, try to look for solutions that way. Focus must be shifted from no waste in production to a life cycle perspective, right? So it's not about no waste production. It has to be about whether it can go through that whole life cycle, go through that where it can go back into the system, into the ecosystem with very little effects to the environment. Physical and digital infrastructure to promote more sustainable trade, right? So again, going back to this, try to make sure that you can source from people who can do things online, who can trade in a sustainable way, who have the infrastructure, be it physical or digital, to promote a more sustainable trade. This will come, you might ask, when does an architect do this? When you're selecting your materials, right? When you're selecting your materials, be very careful who you select from, right? And look for the right certifications, look for people who are close to where your site may be, etc. Examples, in Amsterdam, world's first and largest campus built by recycling shipping containers. All of these here that you see, every one of this is shipping containers. The complex consists of more than 1,000 units, and each unit having its own bathroom, bedroom, and a private balcony. So you can see each one of this is student housing, right? And it's a very creative and innovative way to use recycle materials and to try to see how they can then be part of your built environment. And for me, I think it looks very attractive. Goal 10, reduce inequalities with highlighted issues and possible solutions. The built environment can act as an amplifier and enforcer of inequalities. What do we mean? Disability access. This is a no-brainer. Focus on inclusive design. Again, going back to what I said earlier, inclusive as in not just men and women, yeah. Also make sure you look at older people, people who have disabilities, look at young children, make sure that you design public toilets to have your, your sinks which are lower for children and toilets which are lower for children, etc. Building settlements and towns should focus on the central theme of accessibility and usability. So if you are doing a big planning program or a planning project, or you're involved in one, try to make sure that there is a theme of accessibility and usability so that you can reduce inequalities. Inclusive design based on regional culture and needs. Going back to what I said earlier, if you are going to be doing a town planning in the Middle East, it's going to be a very different way of doing things compared to town planning in Kuala Lumpur. Bear that in mind, understand what the regional culture is about. Again, this is about sustainability. It's not about us trying to impose our culture on them or them imposing their culture on us. It is about architects adapting to the local culture, the local site, understanding what their needs are in order to propose the correct solutions. An example, the House of the Disabled People in Denmark, a fully accessible building that can be used equally by all, solutions that support and encourage all users to be self-reliant as possible have been incorporated, right? Just because you're disabled, you don't really want people to pity you. You want to be able to do things independently. And this also goes for older folk. Another area, reduce inequalities. If any of y'all are planning on looking at retirement villages, with clients looking at retirement villages, think about all of these solutions. Be equitable, right, across the board. Sustainable cities and communities. Now, this is the biggest one that impacts architects the most, as far as I think so, right? So it's crucial for development of sustainable cities and communities. And if you ask me if there's one goal that architects play the most influence on, it is this goal number 11. So with that, I will go through this. Make cities and settlements inclusive, safe, robust, resilient, and environmentally sustainable, right? Urban traffic system, enable walking, biking, commuting by public transport. Participation of all stakeholders into the design process. If you have a kampong in the vicinity of where you're planning, engage with them. If you are having low-cost housing in the surrounding areas, engage with them. If you have rich people in bungalows living in that area, engage with them. You need to get them to participate because it needs to be an inclusive process. Reduce and counteract the environmental impacts. I think this again, when you design your building, go back to your GBI, your green RE, your LEED, whatever it is, that is in the aspect of the particular building. Outside of the particular building, in the streets, make sure your streets are lined with resilient trees, not something that is fancy, but something that is resilient and suited to our climate. Think City is doing a big initiative about street tree resilient program nationwide. And when that study is made available, we will share it across with all parties that are interested. And I think that architects need to take note of that. A climate resilient neighborhood in Copenhagen. This square is an urban space in Copenhagen, first climate resilient neighborhood. The square is a green oasis with which both handles large volumes of rainwater and creates place for the neighborhood residents to meet. So again, this is only one example. I have given you other areas of intervention. In fact, goal number 11 could be a talk by itself because there's so many ways that interventions can happen. Goal 12, responsible consumption and production. Building industry is a major contributor to waste. So what are the areas? Sustainable consumption of the built environment, right? Try to reduce what you use. Use system formwork. Do not use your normal way of formwork if possible. Flexible building design. Again, you need to have a building that can suit different purposes over time. And buildings will go through regeneration, right? Because the way people use a building changes with time. It's not static, it's a dynamic thing. How do you then, perhaps to a certain extent, crystal ball what the future holds, how you can then adapt your space so that it can suit a dual purpose. Recycle or upcycle possibilities through design. Again, going back to what I said, make sure that it's flexible so you can recycle your building, you can upcycle a building. Perhaps it was an office before, now it's turned into a community center. Perhaps it was a shop lot before, now it's a boutique hotel. So how do you do this through design? Prioritize reduction of materials used and waste produced. This example here, upcycle studios in Denmark. The houses are constructed of upcycled concrete, glass, and wood, and are built on market conditions and designed for scalability, right? So these are some of the ways that you can look at it. How do you upcycle your building, which is basically taking materials that are recycled and you upcycle them to reuse them into your building. Or you could also design buildings that are regenerated, have a different purpose over time as there's a change of use. Other areas in which architects can intervene in that specific area is make sure that our public policy or our guidelines when it comes to our authority allows for this kind of dual dynamic. And with the pandemic, that is becoming more and more needed, where you need to have spaces that can function across dual or triple roles. 13, climate change, a very, very big area. Again, this is probably among all the goals, this is also one of the huge ones. CO2 footprint of the built environment must be reduced and buildings and settlements must be adapted to climate change. Integrating renewable energy production, sustainable transportation systems, reducing transport of materials, again, sourcing close by rather than trying to source from, I don't know, from Italian marble. Do you really need to have Italian marble? Could you convince your client to say, hey, go for local marble instead of Italian marble? Emphasizing of local and renewable materials. Apply region-specific building design. Going back to what I said, it's not just a culture thing, it is also a climate thing. You need to make sure that it is adaptable to our climate. Do not, as far as possible, design east-west if you can. Make sure you try to design north-south. And that's just on the passive aspect. What are the other areas that you can do interventions? Then there's also existing built environment must be adapted to the climatic changing conditions. How do you do that? Again, like I said, you know there is more instances of flooding these days. Make sure you have an on-site detention so that our rivers are not overwhelmed and the flooding can be eased. Try to look at other solutions, how you can capture water within site and before it is discharged to the rivers. Quinley Stormwater Park in China, the park stores and purifies stormwater coming from the dense development areas in its surrounding and provides wonderful green landscape, right? So around it, you've got 5 developments, if I'm not mistaken, that are very, very dense. And because it's so dense, essentially, it's also quite polluted. So they use this park as a means of storing and purifying the water. 14, life below water, very important for Penang because we are well facing the sea. We do have areas where our water sources are quite polluted, especially from factories. A built environment is situated in land, but its activities affect the oceans. Building industry affects the oceans, we know this. Reduced transport of materials over long distances by sea. Again, going back to my example of Italian marble, try where you can, use everything that is locally sourced. Pollutants must be handled on site so that they do not reach the groundwater or the ocean. So please make sure that it is treated before you release it. Example, the Warden Sea Center in Denmark. So the center was built in order to disseminate and strengthen knowledge and understanding about mudflats and the sea banks as well, to preserve them. So this is an indirect way an architect can be influencing this. You're designing a building that deals with the knowledge and the distribution of knowledge, and also getting people to understand how to be more sustainable when it comes to life below water. So this is an example which ties in an indirect way to the work that can be done by an architect. 15, life on land with highlighted issues and possible solutions. Amount of building settlements in cities taking up land is rapidly growing. As I mentioned earlier, there will be a point where most of the population of the world is going to be living in cities. Now, there are other thought leadership in this, where people say because of the pandemic, people can prefer to live in wide open spaces and go off into, say they might prefer living in Balik Pulau as compared to, say, a city center, right? There may be some truth to it, but I don't think that we've seen the last of cities. I think cities are still going to be alive. I think cities are still the vibrant areas where innovation can take place. And I don't think that we have seen the last of cities. Protect, restore, and support ecosystems and biodiversity, sustainable tourism, and raise public awareness, right? So you, as an architect, you need to look at the biodiversity of the area. If it is close to the sea, and I see this even in the development right next door to me, right? I live on Scotland Road. Right next door to me, there was a development where the effluent from the building itself was being discharged into the river right next to it. So there is no proper, I would say, enforcement by the authorities to see what they can do about it. But before you even go to the authority level, you as an SO of a site should make sure that that you are looking into it, right? So while there should be enforcement, you have a role to play as well, right? Issue a stop work order if required in order to make sure that things are complied with. Greenfield developments should be minimized. I'm a great proponent for this. I think that we should try to look at urban densification rather than urban sprawl. I think we should look at how we can reuse our buildings. I'll come to that in the next couple of section. Sustainable conditions for local ecosystem for symbiotic relations with the built environment. So I don't think I need to explain this. It's basically very aligned with what you would do in GBI as well. Sustainable and renewable resources, again, aligned with GBI. So if you can use solar panels, etc., if you can try to use natural lighting. Red Ribbon Park in China, supporting natural wildlife while creating access and green and lush areas, densely populated regions, right? So to balance this intervention and preservation, right? Because you have all these dense areas, but then you also have the ecosystem and the biodiversity that you need to preserve. How do you then have this particular area that you zone, that you make sure that the diversity is maintained? Goal 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. This might be, you might think, what do I have to do with this? Then again, if you really look at the examples, every one of this is built by an architect. Parliaments, courthouses, public libraries, they are all about architecture, the built environment. They represent the citizens' commitment to an inclusive and compassionate society. Architects have a role to play, right? You have to make sure that the building that you design brings about that value, right? That value, as well as looking at it inclusive. You're not only building a building that is, say, a courthouse. It's not just about the judges. It's not just about the lawyers. It's about the people who are there as well, the defendants, etc. So values that you put into that building is very important as an architect. to support society's expression of its values through the building and public space. So you need to do that. It needs to be equitable. It needs to represent the values of society. It needs to be inclusive, welcoming, secure, and non-discriminatory, right? So this is also areas which you need to look at. Procurement and construction processes. You must discourage all forms of organized crime. This is easier said than done. Not rely on abuse, exploitation, human trafficking, or child labor. You can do only so much, but if you can try to procure from responsible sources, I think that would be very good. International Criminal Court in The Hague. This is where they try all the very big, serious criminals out there, the Nazis from World War II, etc. And they include a variety of themes, which includes terror prevention, identity making, climate adaptation, stormwater management, safety of stakeholders. So they've incorporated many goals into this building. So then it becomes a place which is aligned with goal 16, right? For peace, justice, and strong institutions. The final goal is goal 17, partnership for goals. Every city, as we know, is built with many hands, and we all need to work together. I can't do this alone, neither can you. And as such, you need to reach the 17 goals. You probably need to work together. So involvement of all stakeholders important. I think the tendency is always when you do a development as an architect is that you try not to engage as much as possible with people around it because it slows down your work. The problem is that that is not inclusive. You need to engage with the surrounding areas, and whether you like it or not, even if you don't, the authority will require you to engage with them. Sharing knowledge, promoting sustainable solutions, and engage in collaboration with research and institutional partners for the implementation, right? So again, sustainable solutions are always being created. I think PAM has got a very strong organization by itself, where you also join with IEM, etc. And there's a lot of knowledge sharing where there's new innovations that come into effect and everything. So we do have that platform already. We just need to keep continuing to build on it and try to do more. Not profit partnerships to provide homes for homeless, or commercial partnerships to develop new sustainable products and services, right? So you have two ways you can go about it. If you find somebody who is a not-for-profit organization that is looking for homes for homeless, I think Penang state government is doing that already with, I think there's a homeless center, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that is all very well and good. So architects can be influencing these spaces. New knowledge, test new practices, engage with local climate, culture and resources, work with end users, life cycle perspective. So all of this is goals that I've already covered before, but they come together because we're talking about partnerships. How do you then partner with certain people who have this particular innovative strategy, or they have a new material? Then you can say, hey, you know what? I want to trial your new material. Show me that it's sustainable. Show me the evidence behind it. You have never had any projects before. Let me partner with you. The upside is, of course, they get exposure for their material. Your client could get a cheaper price. Try to look at partnerships in working in that way, right? But don't source materials that are not sustainable. With that, we have Architecture Without Borders, which is like essentially like Doctors Without Borders, but for architects. And the lead architects behind this, this center, they established a collaboration with NGOs, right? So they came together and they said, okay, you know, Architecture Without Borders, let's be inclusive. Let's get partnerships going. Let's engage with other stakeholders. Let's try to see how we can crowdsource solutions in order to make things a bit more sustainable. This diagram kind of shows you a mapping, right? Now you can't cover all 17 goals in any project that you do, right? It's not possible, and it's not viable either. So what are the different types of projects that you might have in terms of development? So you might have a nature-based development project, right? And that one is talking about ecosystems, biodiversity, about the city, about looking at the economies, but also the climate and resilient communities. And with that, you're probably going to deal with these goals here: 1, 2, 3, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 17, right? You're not going to have all the goals. Then some of the projects that you're dealing with, perhaps your client says, look, I'm looking at it from the perspective of, my company, I'm a public listed company, Bursa is telling me I need to look at ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. And because I'm a public listed company and I have to look at this, our area of expertise, because we supply solar panels worldwide, but we are also a developer, I want to look at projects which introduce low emission development. So how does that tie into sustainability? Let me know, Mr. Architect, how does that tie in with sustainability? How does that tie in with my agenda as my organization for ESG? Tell me what are the goals that I can achieve so I can put it as part of my annual report, my annual sustainability report, which is to be submitted to Bursa, right? So again, these are the ways that an architect can intervene. Circular development projects, those are about production and consumption, sustainability in that aspect of it. So it has a slightly different nuance to it as compared to low emission development projects. Then you've got resilient development projects, which they are talking about recovers from shocks and stresses, which is what we need right now. In the current, immediately what we need right now is a resilient development. Post-COVID, what you need is resiliency. You need to be able to bounce back from where we are at with the pandemic, right? How do you then deal with it? So then there are different areas that you need to have interventions. So then you look at, okay, goal number 1, I can do this, public housing, etc. Okay, goal number 2, what can I do? Urban farming, so you lay it out there. That becomes resilient. Then you've got equitable and people-centered development projects. Okay, then that is a bit more people-centric. That's more lifestyle development. Maybe you've got a developer who's looking at it from, I want to look at lifestyle. I want to have an integrated development that has a more of a lifestyle perspective towards it. Then how do you do it in a sustainable way? These are the goals that you probably need to address. So I hope that with this, it kind of shows you that there are individual goals, and then these individual goals become building blocks to a bigger narrative that you can sell to your client, right? You can sell to them and say, this development I think will fit in very nicely with a nature-based development project, because I think you can fulfill this in this goal, this goal, this goal, and this goal, right? So you could then lay it out for that. You could get them a narration, a narrative, which they can then market for their own development. So it all comes in part and parcel, right? Because what is an architect? Yes, you build spaces. Yes, you look at spatial planning, but you're first and foremost a storyteller, right? You tell a story of what a wonderful place that is well planned can be, and you can tell it through spatial planning, and you can tell it through the way you develop the project. And that's what you do. You are a storyteller in terms of the built environment. So tell this story so that they can market it, and then you get them on board to try to be more sustainable. I would encourage all of y'all here, if you can, there are many facets to sustainability, and it is actually a very, very huge area that you need to look at. So I think that there are many courses run by SDG Academy in edX for free. Look it up. You can sign up. It's all for free, right? It's all for free. So just look it up and look at what are the areas you might be interested in, because it will give you a more in-depth knowledge. My last survey, I'm going to put this up here. If you could just look at it after what I've told you in all the 17 goals, which is actually quite a long presentation. I'm surprised at how much of time it has taken. If you could just go in here and log in to menti.com if you don't have a and I'll share my screen in about 1 minute. I'm going to give this 1 minute. So it's 11:25 until 11:26 for you all to key in your response. The question is, describe what sustainable development is to you in 3 words, right? So there's no right or wrong. Again, it is your 3 words, whatever your 3 words may be. And if you could just share that with me, that would be very helpful. So in the interest of time, please continue to fill in the survey. I will move on to the next session. Okay, Sustainable Development Goals and Penang 2030. Penang 2030 is a document which is about 60 odd pages. It is the roadmap, the visioning roadmap for the state, basically what they're planning to do between now and 2030. It was released, I believe, in 2019. And essentially, this is their roadmap. So I'm going to give you a bit of a quick introduction to it because I was told that there are quite a lot of people who are not quite familiar with it. Okay, so this is how the document is laid out. You have your themes, you have your strategies, you have your key initiatives, and you have your targets. Now, as an architect, you need to understand their themes and their strategies. You need to understand. You need to be aware of their targets. There's not much you can do to influence their targets. You need to be aware. But the area that you actually play a role is the key initiatives. So our focus is going to be, while I'm going to guide you through all of this, this is going to be what are the key initiatives where you as an architect can play a role. Okay, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but essentially what you see at the top here is the theme, right? These are the themes. It's divided into 4 areas, A, B, C, D. A is about livability, B is about the economy, C is about people, and D is about the built environment. And this A, B, C, D, these areas constitute what is the theme of that area. And then they have what is called the strategy. So going back one slide, you have the theme, which is your A, B, C, D, and then you have the strategy for your theme. You just need to understand this so that you can play your role in the key initiatives, right? So what is livability? They're looking at increasing your quality of life, okay? Enhancing your quality of life. Economy, upgrading the economy to raise the household incomes, okay? People, empower people to strengthen civic participation. And then finally, built environment, invest in the built environment to improve resilience. Again, this word, right? So resilience, how are you resilient? How can you bounce back from any shocks that happen to your city or to your state? So they look at it from that perspective. So when it comes to the strategy for livability, they're looking at addressing housing affordability, diversity, public safety, cleanliness, etc. And then for economy, they're looking at the advanced readiness of local manufacturing industries for the digital age and green economy. They're looking to modernize and diversify sustainable agriculture. When it comes to people, they're looking to uplift vulnerable communities and reduce inequalities. And other interventions and strategies that they have here. And with the built environment, they're looking at the balance between development through effective spatial planning. They're looking at strengthening mobility, connectivity, and digital infrastructure. And they're looking at municipal services, smart technology, how to integrate them, how to implement climate change adaptation plans, right? So these are the areas of the 2030 overarching themes and strategies. So that is the first part. That is the first 2 of that banner that you had here. Now, how does this link with the Sustainable Development Goals? I've got this diagram here, which kind of like has these arrows that go from each individual goal, and they show that they're all interconnected. Every one of the goals is actually represented in theme A, B, C, or D. This is the theme, increase livability to enhance quality of life. These are the strategies, address housing affordability, continue to improve public safety and cleanliness, enhance welfare and care systems, diversify recreation, sports, arts, and culture facilities, right? These are the 4 areas within theme A, the strategies that they're looking at, right? And then they have got your key initiatives, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? These are the key initiatives underneath your strategy. And what are these? Not all of these, an architect plays a role. You play a role in some of this. So I've distilled it, right? If you look at the targets from the area here, right? How do you do that? You look at this. The ones which are big are the ones that an architect can directly impact. The ones which are smaller are the areas that perhaps you can indirectly impact, right? Because say, for instance, 50% household recycling rate, that's not something that you can directly impact, but if your development has got the facilities for sorting your recycled material, etc., which is now a law anyway, then you have an indirect link to it. But in terms of total number of low-cost houses, an architect has a role to play. 3,000 families benefiting from urban regeneration housing schemes, an architect has a role to play. So essentially, these are the areas that I see, and I could be wrong because you might have a client who's very forward thinking and he thinks that, no, in mine, I want you to look at specifically target number what in the Penang 2030, and this is what I want to contribute to the Penang state. Fantastic, go for it, right? But these are the areas which I think that by and large, an architect can collaborate with their client and have an impact. Then you've got Team B, which is upgrading the economy to raise household incomes. You've got advanced readiness of local manufacturing, right? With the digital age, technology, green economy, modernize, diversify, sustainable agriculture, create a variety of quality products on the island and mainland, right? And when they say quality products, they also mean tourism products, right? Foster an ecosystem that nurtures creative industries and niche business services, right? And with all of this, you have your strategy here, and then you have got your key initiatives here, which is where the architect may be able to implement something in one of these or many of these. But when I look at the targets that need to achieve, these are the areas, the 3 areas which I see architects play a big responsibility and a big influence, right? I'm not saying you don't play a role when it comes to, say, 20% drop in average food miles. You do if you have an urban farm within your development, but it is not very direct, right? But you do have direct areas which you can intervene. Then we go to Team C, empower people to strengthen civic participation, uplift vulnerable communities and reduce inequalities, boost participation of youth, women, and seniors in community life, and then create a platform for public involvement in social development, accelerate programs, delivery, and institutional reform. Again, you have your key initiatives at the bottom, but I find it very difficult that an architect can actually be directly involved. You're indirectly involved, yes, but not directly involved. I could be wrong. Perhaps in your particular project, you actually see an area where you can be fully involved. More power to you. I'm very happy. But in my research, I really couldn't see how an architect could fit into this. But Team D is where the architect plays most of their role, which is about balanced development through effective spatial planning. No brainer here. Strengthen mobility, connectivity, digital infrastructure, integrate municipal services with smart technologies, implement climate change adaptation plans. This is where most of the intervention comes in, right? In Team D is where the architect plays a huge role. These are the targets that the state wants to achieve by 2030. These are the areas that you as an architect can intervene. Now, how else can you intervene? If your client has a CSR program, right? And we all know this, developer is going to come and ask you, hey, I want to do a CSR in your state. And what can I do that is aligned with your state's goal, right? That's where you go back to the state's goal and you look at this, and then you perhaps have a chat with your adun and say, these are the areas that my client is interested in doing a CSR, and it aligns with Penang 2030. Does it align with your individual goals? So you can look at it that way. Again, this gives your client a roadmap. When your client asks you, actually, why did you choose this? Say, I chose this because you know what? This is part of the vision, the Penang 2030. The local area adun also agrees with that. And I think this is where we're going to get the most support, and as well as most mileage from your CSR. With that, I'm going into the next part, which is Penang Bay as a new economic zone and SDG city zone. I'm going to talk to you about Penang, evolution of Penang in the past 200 years, and positioning of Penang Bay as the Bayan Lepas of the future, right? So you started as a port city over 200 years ago. And then we lost the free port status in 1969, right? So then there was unemployment, vast unemployment. And then we moved into the manufacturing space because in the 1970s, you had Bayan Lepas, right? And you became an industrial city where you had not just high-tech manufacturing, but mass tourism, right? So that was your trajectory, Penang's trajectory between 1970 to 2010s. Then 2020, we had the pandemic, right? And then we realized much earlier, but the pandemic did help to focus these efforts a bit more. We moved into a resilient city, right? And this is what we envision Penang Bay to fit into, right into here, a resilient city where we look at tourism, but not just mass tourism, high value tourism, digital and green economy, right? How do we move past the pandemic? How do we move towards being resilient? Those of you who know the Penang Bay project, who participated in the ideas competition will know this. What are we looking at? Penang Bay encompasses these areas here. If you can see my mouse, the coastlines of the island and the mainland, from the Penang Bridge right up to Tanjung Tokong, all of these areas. And what we're trying to do is the natural urban core of Penang, we're trying to revive it, rejuvenate it, and look at the natural water-based assets, the culture, and to sort of integrate, right? Culture, nature, business, and technology to become more resilient, because you can't just do greenfield developments anymore. You need to look at the assets you already have and try to create an ecosystem that is sustainable. At this moment in time, what you have is everybody's doing their own thing. You've got IGM doing their own thing in the light, you have got ENO doing their own thing, but there's no cohesive partnership to bring everybody together and say, look, yes, you're doing that. How do you integrate with job creation in this area? Because what Penang Bay is all about is a new economic zone, and that is about job creation. It's not just about the built environment, it's about job creation through the built environment, right? This was presented during the World Urban Forum in Abu Dhabi, and Penang Bay, again in 2020, this was presented in February 2020, and we went on a lockdown in March of 2020. So there was among the 9 projects that were shortlisted, over 100 submissions there. And we were shortlisted, right? 9 shortlisted, and we presented Penang Bay. It was very well received. On the panel here, you also have Google Sidewalk Labs that were very interested to come on board. Again, this was pre-pandemic. Things went quiet, but now I will show you that we have continued engagement. It aligns with Penang 2030. It aligns with what YB, what Yang Amat Berhormat Chow Kun Yeow wants to do with the state as well. And these are the areas where the themes A, B, C, D that I showed you in the previous section dovetails with the goals that we have for this particular Penang Bay project, right? So it dovetails with this area. Quick facts, it's the site of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's got about 3,000 acres of potential development land on the mainland, about 1,800 acres of potential development land on the island, 2,000 acres of industrial land, and 30 kilometers of coastline. Subsequently, after the World Urban Forum, we actually had an international ideas competition. It was kickstarted in August of 2020. And we had about 79 submissions from 20 countries. And we went through the process, a very stringent process that took a long time. We had an international jury panel, and we announced the winners in February 2021. I think those of you who participated were well aware of the projects that were submitted, because we had an open portal and it was available online for everybody to see the shortlisted submissions. This is the 10-year roadmap for the projects in motion. As you can see, they are all over the place. We are trying to come up with a strategic master plan for this entire area, right? And part of the strategic master plan is also to get this whole area designated as an SDG cities zone. What is an SDG cities zone, right? SDG cities is a program run by UN Habitat. It is to accelerate the potential of cities and drive the achievement of SDGs. Why do we need it? Well, it enhances local capacities, and it looks at the governance, planning, financing, and services. Who benefits? Cities, because they accelerate realizing their sustainable development goals, and investors as well, because investors are always looking at ESG these days, and they're also looking at impact investment opportunities. So they want to look at a pipeline of assessed, de-risked, verifiable impact investments. How is it certified? It's an inclusive strategic planning process. The analysis, there'll be gap analysis done, interventions proposed, and then with that, then programs will be put into place. So there are 4 levels of certification, from silver, gold, platinum, and diamond. I will not go into the details of it, but it's quite extensive. So Penang Bay was announced as the first city of 7 city projects in the world to be piloted. So these are the other cities, 2 in Spain, 1 in, I believe in Congo, and then you've also got Bolivia, and then you've got Kuwait City as well. So these are some of the cities that are part of these SDG Cities project. It was announced in October in the SDG Cities conference in Shanghai. And we will be the first in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. I wanted to share with you some relevant resources. These slides will be shared across. So this is some of the areas that you can look at. Penang 2030 ebook, if you wanted to go through the 60-page document. And also the ideas competition, Penang International Ideas Competition finalists, as well as the winners. With that, I hope I'm on time. I would like to thank you for your patience and listening to me for so long, and we can go into the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Architect Ahila Ganesan. Very enlightening, eye-opening, and so far for whatever SDG I've attended, we really didn't focus what architects can do for each individual SDG. This is the first time I have this opportunity. I think it's really good. It really opened our eyes up that what architects can do in each of these goals, and collectively, of course, I think you do a project, you wouldn't just cover one goal, So I think it's fantastic. I hope that the young architects, can actually start to look at SDGs more. And just now, another thing is the survey, the third survey that
I'm sharing it right now. Was there a problem with the third survey by any chance?
The QR code.
Oh, sorry. Okay, what I will do is I will share the QR code again.
Yeah.
Sorry, because I was mindful of time and I didn't want to run away with it. Let me share the QR code again, because yes, you're right. I only got 8 responses. Yep, this is the third survey.
Okay, QR code. Okay, I hope more people will participate in the survey.
Yeah, I will also share the results of the survey across, right? I will insert them into the slide deck when I share it. I think it's very important. There's no right or wrong answer, right? But it kind of shows what is important to people, right? What is important to our architects, because they're not just an architect, right? They're also human beings at the base, and that is what they are first and foremost. So it's very important for us to understand what is important to them as well.
Yeah, and to find 3 words just for sustainable developments depends on how much you understand.
Absolutely,
yes,
absolutely. Yes. And I don't think it's something that you can understand in 2 hours. It is not, which is why I have a whole host of resources that you can draw from. It is not, you've only scratched the surface. Yeah, this is the surface. This is just the 17 goals. That's it. A bit about Penang's agenda and a bit about Penang Bay. That's it. This is nothing compared to if you went to each one of the targets. That is a topic in itself.
Yeah. In fact, the topics that you cover is quite wide. In fact, at first we thought, to me, I thought it's just SDGs. But it's more than that, it's about what Penang government is going to do. And Penang Bay, also the Penang 2030. Yeah. Now, the first question that I want to pull up, we have been talking about 2030. I think it has something to do with the United Nations Habitat, the projected year 2030. Maybe can you explain something on that? A little bit like Penang also, we have 2030. Why not 2025 or 2035, right?
Okay, I can explain that very easily. Let me give you, let me go to a different slide. Yeah, I'm going to move to another slide. So those of y'all who can't use the QR code, you can always log into menti.com and put in this key code, which I've inserted in the chat box. So let me show you this slide instead. Okay. The Millennium Development Goals were introduced in 2000, right up to 2015. Now, why 2015? When you look at, say, climate change, which is a very big spoke of the wheel, climate change data comes in 30-year blocks, right? Because the effects of climate change is not something you can say on a yearly basis. You need to collate the information on a 30-year block. So they look at, if you look at 30 years is too long. You can't have these kind of goals for 30 years. So what they did was they did the MDG for 15 years. And then the next 15 years, which is between 2015 to 2030, is the SDGs, right? So this will give you the big spectrum of a 30-year climate, because data is collected on a 30-year basis. So, and climate is one of the big areas that need to fulfill. Plus, when you look at any of these programs that you start, it's not immediately that you are going to be able to get people to buy into the idea, right? Yes, the nations have signed on to it, but they will also take time to make sure that internally they have the capacity gaps that are filled. So in 2015 is when they launched it, right? We are in 2021. It's only 9 years left until 2030, right? And we have not scratched the surface. If you really look at it, we have not scratched the surface. And with COP26, now people are talking about, we want to only look at net zero in 2050. So they pushed it even further, another 20 years, right? So what they have done is they have essentially taken 2020 as the benchmark and said, okay, 30 years, right? 30-year blocks, right? 2020 to 2050. This is where we are looking at. So we are going to head towards that in 2050. So that is the rationale. But the problem with that is that we are really running out of time. We're really running out of time. And if you can have a listen on any of the activists out there when it comes to climate change and everything, and they will tell you the carbon clock is ticking. It's not going to wait for you. You have no power over it. You know, like Donald Trump doesn't have power over it, right? He won't be around to see it happen, the devastation happen, but his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren will be around, and they won't be able to habit the space anymore. So you can't afford to be selfish. You can't afford to be selfish. You need to think about your future. And your future is not you. You might not be around, but your children and your grandchildren will be. Yeah.
I think especially after 6 years after the Paris Agreement in 2015, sorry, I don't think we have achieved much, especially the superpower countries, you know, that consume the most energy, fossil energies, you know, they are the most polluted. The polluter, I will call it, they are not participating also.
Yep.
I'm talking about like US, China, you know, India.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. They have different priorities. Again, you need to look at the global north. When I say global north, that means the developed countries and the global south. They have very different priorities. The global south is not going to, again, this is taken care of, you know, Dato. Essentially, when it comes to climate change and everything, a lot of the money that is being spent right now is to allow for mitigation measures in developing countries. That means the rich countries are paying the poorer countries in order to make it sustainable, right? They're not transferring money over. They're actually looking at it. For instance, for us in Think City, we managed to get a climate adaptation fund from a global source in Europe. They are a European fund. And they essentially, when we did our proposal to them, we managed to get about 10 million US dollars, which is about 40 million ringgit for a climate adaptation program for Penang, the state of Penang, and predominantly on the island, which includes, you know, resilient street trees. It includes looking at mangroves, etc. But again, I just want to let the architects know climate is a very important thing. It is. I cannot deny it. But there are other ways that you can intervene that indirectly also supports the climate change agenda, right? Looking for local materials also reduces your carbon footprint. It also helps with the climate agenda. So it's not just one. I would urge you to look at these three this three, this Venn diagram here, right? This Gambaraja Venn here, where you got people, planet, and profit. You have to understand, I'm a very pragmatic architect, right? I'm a very pragmatic architect because I was in consultancy. I was a property developer for half of my career. So I'm a very pragmatic person, that I know that to go to a corporation or a public listed company and say, hey, you have to do this because it's the right thing to do, it won't fly. It won't fly.
Yeah.
You need to have the right language to address them, right? And the right language to address them is to actually go back to where your project is being where the site of your project is. If it is in Penang, to understand what the Penang state government wants to do, right? And align that with what your client wants to do, right? So they get brownie points from the state. You get brownie points because you've managed to integrate the two and dovetail the two big players here, which is the state government as well as your client, right? And it's a win-win situation. But if you go in there and say, no, we have to do this because, yes, it's more expensive, but I don't care, it's not going to fly. This, Dato, you are an architect, experienced architect, they're not going to fall for it, right? Because not all of your clients are as mature and looking at sustainability in a very mature way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Are there any questions from the?
Yes, the members, dear members. Anybody want to ask questions?
Don't be shy.
I believe, a lot of architects are, we are not really conversant, with this sustainable development. I mean, we have been talking about it, but how many really knows about SDGs, So today, I think is a good beginning of the, I will call it the first of the many series to come on SDGs, on new urban agenda, and perhaps, on Think City also. I think Think City is born, I think, out of the heritage, the UNESCO heritage site, which was given to Penang. So that's where Think City is established. So I think these are the things that perhaps, maybe Architect Ahila, you can explore in the subsequent series of the seminars.
Sure. Absolutely, because you're right. Sustainability is not about just, again, when you talk about heritage, right? Heritage is part of your culture, and that is part of your people. You can't have sustainability if you decide to wipe out a particular culture, right? That's not sustainable, that's not tenable. So you need to intertwine it within your own goals of development. That's where it becomes sustainable. So I had a very interesting conversation with a property agent. This is one of those big, like CBRE, Knight Frank type of thing. I won't mention which one. I had a very interesting conversation with the CEO of that company, and he was saying that, heritage core area, it's so unfair to the owners of the property, right? Because they can't maximize the value of the land that it sits on, right? Because if you could bring down all the old buildings, then the guy could come up with a high plot ratio. He can build a 50-story building. He can get so much money out of it, hundreds of millions, as opposed to what it is right now. Now, in theory, that is true, of course. In theory, yes, you can bring all those buildings down, and then you can build very high plot ratio. It can look like Singapore, etc. Yes, in theory, but will it sell? That's a different matter, right? And also, why exactly do people want to live in Penang? If you really think about it, if you deep dive into it, people want to live in Penang because of the old world charm, right? They like that heritage aspect. They like that. It brings tourists in. Tourists come here because of that. Yes, the food, but it's also that old world charm that Georgetown brings. If you remove that heritage aspect of it, yes, there are certain people that are going to be able to make money, but honestly speaking, you will not have tourism as much as you do right now. You will not have enough jobs, right? Because the job creation will go down because your tourism sector is going to go down, and then your, all of these other sectors will also go down. Who's going to be able to afford the properties that you're going to be putting up in this 50-story building, right? So it is not in it by itself. you have to look at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is very clear. You need to look at all of these 3 circles in order to make it sustainable. You cannot leave out people, you cannot leave out culture and expect that it's sustainable. It's not. You can't just look at profit, right? And say that that's sustainable. It's not.
Yeah, that will lead to your third question, what is sustainable development? How much you understand is related to people, planet, and profit. The 3
Yes,
words.
it's related to people and planet and profit, but it might not be for a lot of people, right? So it could be different. Let me stop sharing here. Let me share the. Actually, it'd be interesting to see if people have filled up more now. Let me just share that screen instead. But I welcome question from the younger architects. If you have any question, is this something that does it resonate with you? Do you think that it is too late? Are we addressing this too late? Do you feel disappointed with the profession that it's not doing it more? How do you feel as an architect? I mean, I would really like to know.
Yeah. Actually, Penang, we are quite fortunate, because Dato Maimuna was is actively involved, in SDGs, while she was still the Dato Banda, in both councils, and to me, I think that Penang people, we should be more engaged with SDGs, and then understanding what SDG is. And apparently, like I think, is it 2 years ago or a year ago, when Dato Maimuna was here, she was saying that since I was the executive director there, I really hope that Malaysian, especially Penang people, will tap into resources that she has had over there, and gets help from her, on all these things, which I think is true. We have direct access to her, and yet we, I mean, of course, like Think City, and yourself, maybe you all are directly involved, but for most architects, or even like institutions like PAM, IEM, we should be more active to link with her on whatever resources that she can provide, for SDG.
Absolutely, absolutely. We are very actively involved with UN Habitat. In fact, the SDG Cities program is a program by UN Habitat. So we deal with them specifically on this particular area, but not just this, we deal with them on other areas as well. Climate adaptation program, they are also our partners for the climate adaptation program. So again, we do deal with not just that, we have other UN agencies. UN Habitat is only one of the many agencies under United Nations. So we have partnerships across with UNEP, UNDP, right? So there are other agencies as well. Dato, I just wanted to say, I mean, pending any questions, right? When we started this, if you can see, can you see my screen with the first question? Yeah, so when we started this, we had 2 people who were very familiar, 3 who had never heard, and 13 who were somewhat familiar. We had about 18 responses. I am hoping that by the end of today, I mean, this session, that a lot of the ones who are somewhat familiar are going to go towards very familiar, and the never heard of it is, moves towards somewhat familiar. Because if that happens, then my day is well spent, my job is done, so to speak, for this session, right? And perhaps, in the future, what I can do is I could have a survey at the end of it asking, after this, where are you now? Are you very familiar, never heard of it, or somewhat familiar?
Yeah. Another question is, out of all these 17 goals, which particular one actually refer to the funding, intergovernmental funding with World Bank and or country to countries, Of course, you need money, especially for the poor country, to have all these SDGs attainability.
Let's put it this way. There is no one particular funding. It will really depend. There's a lot of sources of funding out there through grants. There's actually a website that is devoted to that. for funding of grants and everything. And it will really depend on what you are looking at, because if it comes, there are certain agencies that are focused on, say, poverty, right? And then there are certain agencies that are focused on climate. So their focus is on climate. So the amount of money that they have is related to climate. So they will disperse grants based on climate. Whereas the amount of money that you have for the poverty people, they are going to be dispersing that. So not all countries, it's not like a one big pool that World Bank controls. No, it is many different organizations. And there are a lot of organizations out there that have pools of fund. It could be from private entities. It could be within the government. It could be like, say, Sweden. The government of Sweden has a particular fund that is targeted towards a particular goal, where they're trying to give out grants to see improvements in another country, right? On this goal 1, 2, 5 or something like that, right? So it could be many different ways. There's no one bank, no.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, this is the second one, environmental, social, and economic. I think, yes, I agree with this, but I think that not everybody will agree with this. It really depends on who you're talking to. This was the last one, the keywords. As you can see, environment, the ones where it's bigger, it means it had more votes. Environment, livability, happy, healthy seems to be, you know, happiness comes up very often.
Yeah.
Any of the other panelists have questions?
Oh, everybody's very shy.
Yeah.
May I say something?
Sure.
I think it's a fantastic presentation. I think for perhaps our architects in Penang and the northern region, they can kind of take heat in small little steps, you know, small bite first.
Yeah.
Because it's a rather large elephant. Yeah.
Yes.
I think to introduce that, as I said, the policy into their practices, so they can actually look at it, and then you develop it over time, really, because it's quite overwhelming for them to take it all at once, I think.
Sure.
But bear in mind and consciously to kind of take it through time. It's very similar to GBI in terms of the, you know, the process, I think. So it's not something that is entirely new in terms of the process, but the content is probably slightly new to all of us from the survey, because they're not very familiar, you know. So, I mean, take small little steps, but start doing it. I think that's a office policy, really.
I think for the beginning, maybe certifications, voluntary certification on SDGs, like what GBI is, that would be interesting, you know, to bring more awareness to all the architects. You know, like attaining to out of these 17 goals, you know, your project involved, how many goals maybe you are targeting, you know, how many goals that you may have achieved, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dato and Architect Liao, I absolutely agree. This, like I said, Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 goals, there's so many targets, 169 targets. It is a very, very big topic. I'm very sure that those who are somewhat familiar might walk away perhaps a bit more confused. I wouldn't blame them, but at the end of the day, you need to start somewhere, right? You need to start somewhere. And if it is simple things like making sure your design is climate conscious, right? And make sure that your office, within your office, the materials that you source, etc., you know, if you're going to start from your office, what you source and everything is sustainable, that is already going a long way, right? We are actually, architects are already doing it in the building level, because you're already doing GBI and Green RE. Now it's a matter of how do you then translate it to the next level, right? Your city level and your region level.
Yeah. I was wondering, like in Think City, I believe that you did collect data, right?
Yes.
Data on many other things. I think these data are very important. Like in the Penang Green Councils also, I did bring up, and then to Yang Ahmad Muhammad also I did bring up. I say that we are in this big data age, you know, and the data collection, and more important is the analysis of this data. You know, for example, like I believe the traffic data, we have that. We have all the CCTVs all everywhere. and to collect, I mean, to analyze this data, to lessen the traffic impact, along the main road, especially during working peak hour. I think those are important. But I think now with this parking system that we have, we may be able to check, like for example, I was told that about 30% of the car, we call this society, in the city is due to people going into the city looking for car park. So if we have a system whereby that you can check, okay, I want to go to the city whereby you don't have the car park there, then I can go to the last mile, where I can take a cab, whatever, rather than everybody rushing into the city, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that is important.
Yeah.
And then another thing is, another one is, which I also bring up, about QR codes. I think QR codes can be very, very useful. Like, for example, identifying the trees, I think like children, they can just take a handphone, snap, and say, oh, okay, these trees, how long it takes to grow this tree, whether they are hardy tree, whether, how much carbon capture can be whatever. They start to appreciate the trees more, like for example, the heritage building also, you can have a QR code on each building that you can check the history of the building, and it has been used for what, adaptation, eventually, whatever, I think QR codes is going to be quite important if we know how to use it. So I don't know, I think these are a lot of direction that we can go as a smart city, and especially we are trying to achieve that smart city status. Any other questions from the others? Oh yeah, talking about sustainable developments, I think from the United Nations, the definition is development that meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs.
Yes.
It means that we don't take away their resources, eventually.
Yep,
so I think
exactly.
that's sustainable developments, the definitions. And then another one is inclusive. What do we mean by inclusive? Nobody is left behind. It means like that include everybody, the rich, the poor, the underprivileged, everybody. So these are the words which I, when I first go into SDG about 10 years ago, I start to, looking at what is all this meaning, right? I think it's quite important, Any other question from the floor?
Excuse me.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for such a very good presentation. I just want to share an observation. Recently, I came across a book titled 11 Billion. Okay, 11 billion. What this book is doing is that if you look at the internet now, the world population now is about 7.9 billion. So they are expecting that by the end of this century, the 21st century, the population of the world will reach about 11 billion.
Yes.
So this is a very drastic increase, So the question now is that the changes that is to come to cater for this kind of society of 11 billion is going to be much more fundamental than what we can imagine, right? It's going to be much more fundamental. And what they are saying is that the root problem now is consumerism.
Yes.
Because he highlight the concept of ecological footprint. Okay, so if you say the world consume now is like if you consume 1.0, that means the world resources can consume can sustain that population needs at 1.0. But now the ecological footprint is already 1.5.
Yes,
right?
it's 1.5.
1.5, yeah. So it's already 50% more, right? So what we have to do is not just simple steps like that, because you have to go back to the lifestyle of consumerism and things so on and so forth, right? So this describes the urgency, and I bring this up because when you want to talk to your clients or you talk to your neighbors and all these things, by telling them the real kind of changes that's to come, it would possibly make it much easier, right?
Yeah.
Because we cannot just proceed at this 1.5. Right?
Yeah.
So this is just my observation,
Yeah.
and that's why now I become very interested after I listen to COP26 and after I read this book. I become much more interested.
So, Architect Lim, just to let you know that I'm assuming you're an architect. I
Yes,
don't know you personally. Yes. So yeah, you're absolutely right. We are consuming 1.5 times over what we are allowed to. There will be a reckoning as far as climate change is concerned if we don't do something about it, which is why you have the younger generation doing their climate strike, school strike on a weekly basis, etc. Right? Because they can see it. And there is what you would call a reluctance from people in power to do it because they are not thinking about the long term. They have what I would call the short-termism, right? They're afflicted by short-termism. They are only looking at their next election. They're only looking at staying in power. They're not looking at the long-term aspect of it. But here's the thing: even within Malaysia, your clients, if they are companies who are listed, they will have no choice but to move forward in this direction because Bursa is mandating that they move in this direction of ESG. It is a big part of their organization goals in order to make sure that they are sustainable. Now, how is it going to affect them? Let me just give you an example, right? If you are a person who is a developer, right? You want to look at buying land, right? You need to make sure that you have the climate change data that is expected 30 years from now or 10 years from now. Because you say, I want sea view, sea view, location, I need sea view, I can sell. The problem is with sea level rising, and it's going to happen, right? It is going to happen. We might be able to reduce the amount of sea level rise, but it will happen. What might be sea view might be undersea by the time you actually get down to development. So if you are a person in business development, in a property development company, you can't now look at land banks only in terms of itself and you say, oh, this is a good area because it's got the network and support system and everything. You have to look at the climate data aspect of it as well, right? Especially if you're looking for something which is on lower lying area or sea fronting. So it makes sense to them, right? So businesses have come to realize that it makes sense to them. I'll give you another example. We know that climate data shows that places like Bangladesh is going to be underwater and flooded. We know that this will happen. How extreme it will be, we don't know, but we know it will happen. Now, if you have businesses like, say, Zara, right? Zara says, hey, Mr. Architect, I want you to build my factory in Bangladesh, in Dhaka. I need you to build this 1,000 square feet, this 1,000 square feet and everything, because that's where we are getting our workers from, Bangladesh. They're going to find that in another 10 years, it might not be the right solution for them, right? Because you will have the next big change that is going to happen is climate refugees. These are not refugees that you're war-torn refugees. These are climate refugees. Bangladesh will have a lot of them. India will have a lot of climate refugees. Right? They will start trying to move out of the country because the extreme weather events that happen will make it so. So whoever is your client who said, Mr. Architect, please go and build me a factory in Dhaka, is going to realize that his factory is probably going to be underwater or the workers have all left, right? So basically what I'm trying to tell you is companies are already starting to realize that they have to look at this because it is not in the interest of just the planet, it's in the interest of themselves, their business, their bottom line. So they have also come to start to expect that they have to do something to it. And all of your bosses around the world, meaning your Bursa, Malaysia, or even like in other countries, whatever stock exchanges you have, are expecting it from your public listed companies. Private entities or SMEs will be the next round of people who will have to look at it as well. You cannot run away. You really cannot run away. And architects need to understand that Your clients are going to move in this direction. You need to bring that value add on how you can deliver the expectation of your client. It might not happen today. It will happen soon enough. If there's anything this pandemic has done, it has accelerated this entire spectrum of what people are planning to do. So there's a couple of examples lah.
Yeah. Apparently we are running out of time. Maybe one last question or whatever. Yeah, anyway, I think this during the, I still remember during the public participation for the state structure plan, you know, I did mention to the Plan Malaysia, I said that we should come up with a map, you know, whereby showing all those low-lying area subjected to flood, you know, color it up, you know, to show this area is actually a flood-prone area.
Sorry, Dato, you don't have to. The data is available online already. I will put it as part of the resources. You will know where exactly Penang stands.
Yeah.
There is already data available. I'll put it in part of the resources, and it will show you exactly what the low-lying areas. And it's quite shocking, yeah. It is not an exact science because they are projecting, right? They are projecting based on science. So they're saying based on the patterns that have been happening, again, like I told you, climate data is available every 30 years because it takes a long gestation time.
Yes.
They have collated the information, they have mapped. So Dato, you don't have to start from ground zero. It is already done.
Yeah.
I will share that link with you.
Yeah. No, because at that time, you know, I was saying that, you know, whether they can reflect that, you know, in the structure plan, you know, so that as an architect, when we design, we say, oh yeah, this area is actually low lying. Then what should we do? You know, we should
they can't, lah, Dato, because it is contrary to their own interest. They can't. I don't think they will want to do it. The science is out there, right? The science is not a part of the state document, but the science is out there, and it will happen. So I can share that with you, not a problem at all.
Okay, sure. I think that it would be good, you know, if you can share with Pam, then the architects, you know, all our members can.
You can zoom into any part of the world, and it will show you what are the areas that are going to be affected. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a particular website, right? I remember, you know, you just type in, you know, like which area, what if you have 1.5 degree increase in temperature, which
projections, yes.
Flooding, yes. And then 2.4, how much? I think if we talk about 2 degrees, in fact, the whole price is in the water, you know.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. You know, if there's no question, I really appreciate your time, Architect Ahila, and please sign in and sign out for the seminar. Sign in code is 8719. Sign out code is 9516. Okay. Thank you so much, our speaker.
Thank you.
I hope that you know, we have more seminars from you, which I'm really hoping for, like SDG 11, SDG 13, you know, the new urban agenda, all these things, and then what Think City is doing. I think that would be good. Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.